My daughter had been planning this engagement party for 6 months and honestly everything looked like a spread from a home magazine. The backyard of our property in Sonoma was strung with those warm Edison lights that make everything look a little bit like a dream. 60 guests were laughing and clinking glasses of local Chardonnay, and my future son-in-law-to-be was standing right in the thick of it all. He had his arm around my daughter Maya's waist and he was smiling with the kind of absolute confidence you only see in men who think they have already won the lottery. That was when Maya slipped away from him for just a second and came over to where I was leaning against the stone garden wall near the hydrangeas. She squeezed my forearm so hard I could feel her nails through my linen blazer, and she whispered 4 words that made the wine in my hand feel suddenly very heavy. "Dad, check his references." Then she just walked back to him and flashed a bright smile at a neighbor who was offering congratulations, and she acted as though nothing had happened. I kept my face as still as granite. 41 years in commercial real estate in Northern California will teach you how to keep a poker face if nothing else. My name is Robert Sterling. I am 64 years old and semi-retired, and I live on the estate my late wife Sarah and I built together over 30 years in the Russian River Valley. Sarah passed away 4 years ago from a cancer that moved faster than any of us were prepared for. Before she died, she made me promise 2 things. The first was that I would stop working 80-hour weeks and actually learn to sit still. The second was that I would look after our daughter Maya. Not in the way that keeps a grown woman small or sheltered. Sarah was very clear about that part. She meant the other kind of looking after, where you pay attention and where you stay awake to the world around her. I had not always been great at that second promise during the busy years of my career, but I was trying my best now. Maya was 31 when she met Tyler Vance at a charity gala in San Francisco. She had moved to the city 8 years earlier and built a solid career in hospital administration, and she had been very careful with her heart after a couple of breakups that left her bruised. She called me 2 days after that gala and I could hear something different in her voice immediately. It was not just excitement. It was something softer and steadier than excitement. He was 40 years old, she told me. He was a high-end financial consultant who specialized in estate planning for wealthy families. He had grown up in Boston and moved out west for graduate school and spent 15 years building a private practice. He was measured, she said. He asked real questions and actually listened to the answers. He made her feel seen. I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. The first time I met Tyler was at a dinner she organized at a small bistro in Healdsburg about 3 months into their relationship. He had driven up from the city specifically for the night. He was tall and dressed in that quiet luxury style that costs a fortune without looking like it, and he had that specific quality that top-tier salespeople develop over years of practice. It is the ability to make whoever they are talking to feel like the most important person in the room. He asked about my career with what seemed like genuine fascination. He knew enough about the California real estate market to ask intelligent questions about zoning and commercial interest rates. He was attentive to Maya in a way that looked entirely natural. But when I drove home that night and sat in Sarah's old reading chair for a long time, I felt uneasy. Something felt like a performance. I could not explain it better than that. Nothing he said was factually wrong. Nothing he did was out of place. But there was a quality to his attention that reminded me of someone doing a very good impression of a human being rather than actually being one. Sarah would have told me I was being cynical or impossible. Maybe she would have been right. So I kept the feeling to myself for over a year. They dated for 14 months before he proposed. He did it at the restaurant in Napa where they had their first real date. She called me from the parking lot afterward, still crying happy tears, and I told her I was thrilled for her. I was not entirely lying because I wanted very much to be thrilled. The engagement party in Sonoma was 6 weeks later. Maya had organized most of it herself with help from her best friend Chloe, who had flown in from Seattle for the weekend. Tyler arrived the evening before with a suitcase that looked like it held half a boutique, and he settled into the guest room and spent the morning before the party taking urgent calls in the back garden. He would end those calls quickly whenever I came near. I told myself that was normal for a consultant. Then Maya said what she said at the party, and I understood that she had been waiting for a moment when she could say it without being overheard. She had chosen her words carefully. 4 words. Enough to tell me something was wrong, but not enough to cause a scene. My daughter is not a woman who panics. She had been carrying something heavy, and she had finally decided it was time for me to help her hold it. I am not a man who uses the internet particularly well. My assistant at the firm spent years gently redirecting me away from search engines and toward phone calls, which I am much better at. But I knew enough to start somewhere. I typed in Tyler Vance, financial consultant, Boston, and spent hours reading every link. His professional website was clean and credible. LinkedIn showed a steady career history with no gaps. There were a couple of mentions in industry publications about estate tax laws. Nothing remarkable. His face appeared in a group photograph from a charity golf tournament in San Francisco 3 years earlier. Everything looked exactly as it should look. That was in a strange way what bothered me the most. It was too perfect. It was a digital facade that lacked the messiness of a real life. The next morning I called Maya before Tyler was awake. She came outside to the garden where the morning mist was still clinging to the vine rows, and I asked her directly what she had found. She told me she had been using his laptop a few weeks ago because her own phone was dead and she needed to check a flight. He had left a browser tab open. It was a spreadsheet. At the top of a column she had time to read a few lines before she heard him coming down the hallway. She saw Maya's sterling Sonoma property estate value and then a number she recognized as a very accurate approximation of what she believed my estate to be worth. There were other names on the list too. Names of women from other cities followed by $signs. She closed the laptop before he reached the room and she said nothing. She had spent 3 weeks trying to convince herself there was an innocent explanation, like he was just being a diligent financial planner for their future. I told her she had done the right thing by telling me. I told her to act normal and that I would handle the rest of it. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was 9 years old and had fallen off her bicycle and was trying very hard not to cry. I held that look together as long as I needed to until she went back inside. Then I went into my study and called my lawyer. Evelyn Reed had handled our family's legal work for 18 years. I had first hired her when Sarah and I were restructuring our property holdings, and she was the person who helped me set up the family trust after Sarah died. The Sterling Family Trust represented the accumulated work of 4 decades. It included the Sonoma property and 3 commercial buildings in Sacramento and a portfolio of investments Sarah had managed with extraordinary patience. Maya was the primary beneficiary. I asked Evelyn how quickly assets could be moved if someone were to marry Maya, and she then added them as a co-trustee. Evelyn was quiet for a moment before saying it could happen in a matter of days if they had the right documentation and access to the financial institutions. She explained that a marriage certificate and Maya's signature on the modification paperwork would be enough to grant full access. I thanked her and told her I might need to call again soon. Then I called a man named Jim Vance. I had met Jim 15 years earlier when he was conducting background checks for a large commercial transaction. He had since built a highly regarded private investigation practice in San Jose. He was methodical and discreet. I told Jim I needed a complete background check on Tyler Vance, 40 years old, financial consultant, San Francisco. I gave him the details Maya had shared with me over the last 14 months. I did not tell him why yet. I asked how long it would take. 3 days for the surface work, he said, and a week for anything deeper. I told him I needed it in 5 days. He said he would see what he could do. Those 5 days were among the most difficult I have ever spent. Tyler stayed in Sonoma for 2 more days after the party, and he was helpful and easy to have around. I sat across the dinner table from him each evening and talked about wine and property values and the particular challenges of the highway traffic in the Bay Area. He was very good at dinner table conversation. I found myself almost liking him at times, which made everything feel so much worse. Jim called me on the 5th day. He told me the real name was not Tyler Vance. It was Travis Holloway, and he was born in Manchester, New Hampshire 41 years ago. The Boston background was partly true because he had lived there for a while, but the career history Jim's sources uncovered was substantially different from the one on his LinkedIn profile. There was a civil lawsuit in Massachusetts from 7 years ago involving a former business partner who alleged that Travis Holloway had misrepresented financial documents in order to gain access to a joint account and had then liquidated it. Jim called back as promised, and the news was even more chilling. Lydia Cross had worked for 3 years as a paralegal at an estate planning law firm in Colorado. She had left that firm under circumstances Jim described as unclear, but noted that she had departed without a reference. She now worked on paper as a freelance legal consultant. Her actual income appeared to come primarily from the numbered company she shared with Travis. More importantly, Jim had found a way to access a portion of their correspondence. In those emails, Travis referred to Maya as the California prize and used a shorthand for the Sterling estate that made the nature of the plan undeniable. Lydia had been advising him on the trust modification process step by step. I closed my eyes and thought about Sarah. I thought about the 30 years she had spent helping me build everything that was now sitting in the crosshairs of 2 predators. Then I started planning my own moves. Maya's wedding was 8 weeks away at a winery in St. Helena. But the rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the night before at a boutique hotel in Healdsburg. 40 guests including immediate family and the wedding party would be there. I called Evelyn Reed again and told her what Jim had found. She told me she could work with a contact in the FBI's white-collar crime division. She said the documentation Jim had assembled was likely sufficient to open a formal investigation. But she also told me that the most durable outcome would be if Travis was caught in the act of attempting the fraud. I told her to make the call to the FBI and that I would handle the rest of it. There is a particular kind of patience that you develop in 40 years of negotiating high-stakes real estate deals. You learn to wait until the other side thinks they have already won. I called Maya and told her everything, including the emails and the previous marriage and the partner in Denver. She sat on the other end of the phone without speaking for a very long time. And then she said in a voice that was entirely steady that she was ready to do whatever was necessary. I needed her to do nothing differently. I needed her to keep planning the wedding and to respond to Travis's messages the way she always had. It was a great deal to ask of someone who had just been told that the man she was going to marry was a career con artist. But she did not hesitate. Jim had found that Lydia Cross would be in Healdsburg the weekend of the rehearsal dinner. She was registered at the same hotel under her own name and was listed on the hotel booking as a wedding vendor coordinator. Travis had added her under the cover of the wedding planner's external coordination team, claiming she was a legal consultant reviewing the venue contract for liability issues. I arrived at the Healdsburg Hotel the morning of the rehearsal dinner and met Jim in the lobby cafe. He handed me an envelope containing a printed summary of everything he had found along with a USB drive containing the digital evidence. He also handed me a small digital recorder that fits easily in a jacket pocket. The rehearsal dinner started at 7 in the evening. The hotel's private dining room overlooked the valley and the early September light was turning the hills a deep shade of amber. Travis was in excellent form. He made a toast to Maya that was genuinely moving and full of poetic language about their future together. My son Leo, who had driven up from the city, leaned over to me at one point and said quietly that he thought he had misjudged Tyler and that he seemed like a good man. I told Leo that I hoped he was right while feeling a sick knot in my stomach. At 8:45 I watched Travis excuse himself, saying he needed to make a quick work call regarding an estate in Boston. He walked toward the hotel corridor that led to the elevator bank. I gave it 4 minutes and then excused myself with an apology about my back, which is in fact not in great shape. I walked the same corridor and Jim had already confirmed that Lydia Cross was in room 312. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and found the hallway quiet. I walked slowly with the recorder already running in my pocket. When I reached room 312 I could hear 2 voices clearly through the door. Lydia's voice was the sharper one and she was going through a final checklist. She was talking about the trust modification form and the specific pages that needed Maya's signature. She told Travis she needed those signatures before midnight on Friday so she could have the transfer request submitted by the opening of business on Monday. She explained that the banks would not flag it as unusual if it came through the trust account with both signatures on file. Travis's voice was calm as he asked about the property transfers. Lydia told him those would take longer, but they did not matter because the liquid assets in the investment accounts alone were worth more than enough. She said they would be well clear of the country before anyone realized the transfer was not a routine distribution. Then Travis laughed. It was that pleasant and warm laugh I had noticed from the beginning. There was a silence of about 4 seconds inside the room. Then the door opened and Travis stood there, and I saw the sequence of expressions that crossed his face. First there was confusion, then recognition, then a rapid recalculation, and then finally the smile. He actually managed to produce a smile. He asked Maya what they were doing up there. Maya looked past him at Lydia Cross, who was sitting at a small desk with a legal folder open in front of her. Maya asked who the woman was in a voice that was entirely level. Travis said it was Lydia, the consultant he had mentioned, who was reviewing the venue paperwork. Maya looked at him for a long moment, and then she told him she had heard everything they said about the trust and the flight to Portugal. Travis's smile did not disappear immediately. From behind me in the hallway I heard the heavy footsteps of Jim and the 2 agents from the FBI. I turned to Travis and told him I knew his real name was Travis Holloway. I told him I knew about the lawsuit in Massachusetts and the former wife in Connecticut and the settlement her father paid. I told him I knew about the numbered company and what he planned to do with Maya's inheritance. I told him the authorities were already aware of everything. His face went entirely still and all the charm vanished, leaving something cold and hollow underneath. The lead agent stepped forward and identified himself and told both Travis and Lydia they were being detained for questioning in connection with an investigation into interstate financial fraud. He was calm and professional as he read them their rights. Lydia started saying something sharp about needing a lawyer while Travis said nothing at all. They were escorted from the room and the folder on the desk which contained the trust modification documents was taken as evidence. I stood in the doorway of that hotel room for a moment after they were gone and looked out the window at the valley, which was fully dark now. Then I went back downstairs with my daughter to face the crowd. What happened next was one of the hardest things I have ever witnessed. Maya stood in front of 40 people in that private dining room and told them in very few words that the wedding was cancelled. She told them she was fine and that she would appreciate their privacy and support in the coming days. Some people cried and others looked relieved in the way people do when something they suspected but could not say is finally out in the open. Her brother Leo sat with her for a long time afterward. I took a walk along the river by myself around 10:00 and Oppo's clock that night. It was a cool night for early September and it reminded me that summer is always temporary. I thought about Sarah and the way she used to sit in the garden in the evenings with a glass of wine watching the light change. The investigation moved forward over the following months and the core of what Jim and Evelyn had assembled held up under scrutiny. Travis Holloway and Lydia Cross were formally charged and investigators were able to reopen previous cases with the new evidence we provided. The former business partner in Massachusetts called me directly to say thank you, and that call was unexpectedly hard to get through. Maya took 4 months to settle herself. She stayed in San Francisco but took a leave from work for 6 weeks and spent time with her real friends. She drove up to Sonoma several weekends to sit in the garden with me and talk about everything or nothing at all depending on the day. She often asked how she could have missed the signs. I told her she did not miss them because she felt that something was wrong, and she said those 4 words to me at the party. I told her that her instincts were up against a professional who had spent 14 months perfecting a lie. She told me she wanted to trust people again and that she did not want to become someone who was always suspicious. I told her she would be fine and that real trust is not something you hand over freely but something you extend slowly while watching what a person does with the small things. The winter that followed was one of the coldest we had seen in Sonoma for a decade. The vines stood bare and skeletal against the gray sky, and I spent a lot of time in the cellar organizing the vintages that Sarah and I had bottled together. Each bottle was a timestamp of a year we had survived. Some years were dry and difficult and the wine was bold and tannic. Other years were perfect with just the right amount of rain and sun and the wine was smooth and elegant. I realized that life is much the same way. You cannot have the sweetness without the seasons of cold. Maya came up for Christmas and we did not do anything big. We just stayed by the fire and looked at old photo albums. She found a photo of Sarah from the year we bought the property. Sarah was covered in dirt and holding a shovel, and she was laughing so hard her eyes were closed. Maya looked at that photo for a long time and said she remembered that day. She remembered how Sarah had insisted on planting the first row of vines herself even though the workers were there to do it. Sarah wanted her fingerprints on the foundation of our life. Maya said she realized now that Travis never would have understood that kind of labor. He only wanted the harvest and he did not want the dirt or the waiting. He was a man of shortcuts. I watched Maya as she spoke and I saw the strength returning to her shoulders. She had started running again in the mornings and she looked healthy. We talked about the trial which was set for the spring. She said she was not afraid to testify anymore. She wanted to look Travis in the eye and show him that he had failed to break her spirit. She told me she had realized that the money was the least important thing he tried to steal. He tried to steal her ability to believe in goodness. But by standing up to him she had taken that back. As the first buds of spring began to show on the vines, Maya's new relationship began to grow too. His name was David and he was a teacher. He did not have a flashy car or a high-end watch. He had a quiet voice and a way of making Maya laugh that sounded genuine. I met him for the first time in April and we did not talk about real estate or estate planning. We talked about books and the best way to grow tomatoes in the Bay Area fog. He did not try to impress me and he did not try to be the most important person in the room. He was just there. I sat on the porch after they left and felt a sense of peace I had not felt since Sarah died. I had kept my promises. I had stopped working 7 days a week and I had looked after our daughter. But more importantly, I had watched her learn to look after herself. I poured a glass of the 2014 Reserve which was Sarah's favorite and I watched the sun set over the hills. The light was golden and clear and for the first time in a long time I did not feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just present in the moment. The story of Travis Holloway and Lydia Cross became a cautionary tale in the local papers, but for us it became a turning point. It was the moment we stopped just surviving the loss of Sarah and started building something new on the foundation she had left us. It was a foundation of truth and attention and the kind of love that does not need a performance to be real. I realized that the best references a person can have are not found on a resume or a website but in the way they treat the world when they think no one is watching. Maya had learned that lesson the hard way, but it was a lesson that would serve her for the rest of her life. I think Sarah would have been very proud of both of us.